Welcome back to Smug and Play, YouTube's premier Windows 9X gaming culture and technology video show. We don't typically talk about current events on this show. We're really more into the sort of mid to late 90s gaming scene. So I was surprised when Alan reached out to me to record a special episode. This is something about Apple getting into the breast implant market or something like that. Apple silicone, right? Is that what we're talking about today?
Something like that. They released their own silicon based on ARM.
Apple Silicon. Oh, I misread that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they basically took the chip from the iPad Pro and slapped it in their MacBooks. And I'm here to tell you that this is a very consequential decision by Apple.
I would agree.
Should I get into my Shakespearean mode?
Go, please. Don't let me get in the way.
Gamers, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury the PC, not to praise it. Which is to say, we think the IBM PC is on its last legs. It's in its lame duck session.
It's in its lame duck session, which means it's going to try to obstruct as much as possible. However, there's really not too much it can do in the face of reality. And
if the PC will offer $20K a day to Rudy Giuliani,
Rudy Giuliani is trying to keep the PC alive. Well, so I agree with you, and I think we should be very careful with how we define the PC, because we're really talking about personal computers or computing devices in the model of the original IBM PC, which is to say, a computer composed of commodity parts that are organized into interchangeable modules that communicate over industry standard buses and connectors. Now that is an elaborate definition.
It's a very abstract idea.
And yet it has a lot of very concrete ramifications. This show, all YouTube tech channels.
Yeah, that's true.
In which they're doing PC builds,
And also the latest video game consoles, both from Sony and Microsoft, are both almost IBM PCs. So it is big. It's such an abstract idea, though. I was thinking about you just showing John Hodgman from the John Hodgman, Justin Long Apple commercials to define the PC, because I think everybody knows what that is. Right?
Yes. The PC is a little bit pudgy, it's awkward, but very adorable.
It's weird because I feel like those commercials made the PC look better than it is. You know, like Justin Long's cool. I mean, he had one Die Hard movie, I guess, but John Hodgman's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean John Hodgman's and what's really funny about it, I mean, John Hodgman's whole shtick is that he does privilege comedy, privilege humor, based on his Ivy League background and all this, and Mac is the privileged platform much more than IBM PC. I see IBM PC as being more proletarian. And so in some ways it's reversed, but, Apple's always trying to project this image of, of course Gandhi would be able to afford a Mac Pro. Why wouldn't he? It's what we expect from Apple. But so what do we want to talk about here? Do we want to talk about? Let's talk about the evidence supporting this claim that the PC is dead, or if not dead.
I haven't made my claim explicit. So, as you said, the IBM PC has been based on this x86, architecture that, everything that theoretically that started there, you could maybe run that software on a new computer, new IBM PC compatible. But my claim here is I think, Apple's now gone to their own ARM-based architecture, and I think the PC industry will soon follow Apple and not be x86 exclusively. We could see, certainly we could continue to see some x86 based ones, but I assume ARM ones will pop up. It's not inconceivable that RISC-V architecture something could also, pop up, and it's not crazy because there's already Windows 10 for ARM, for example.
Yeah, so Microsoft already has a product that does.
I don't even think this is extraordinary claim in any sense, but I think it's going to happen. And I was sort of disappointed that it felt like the popular media coverage is just kind of talking very much about the now with the changes to the Macs. They're talking about, the new Mac Mini doesn't have 10 gigabit Ethernet. We're so upset. And I don't, obviously that affects some number of users, but I do think this is going to be a big shift in computing in general.
Yeah.
And I think we should, Apple's annoying in a lot of ways about how they communicate with people, but I think we should praise them. They've done a good job of not just waiting for their suppliers to somehow, in this case, Intel, somehow catch up to their expectations. When the PowerPC
or even jump over to AMD and hope that AMD, who's currently sort of in a better position with regard to power per watt, or performance per watt, the metric that Apple says they care about the most, because they primarily are making portable products. AMD is doing better there than Intel, but Apple has absolutely leapfrogged AMD as well, and that is
when you look at the benchmarks, you can see right out of the gate they're at least doing as well as an AMD processor. So I think we should applaud them. They care about their customers in terms of performance and how hot the machines run and how much battery life. And they didn't just wait for some promise from their supplier to fix all those things. They made the leap. So I think they deserve a lot of praise. We should talk about why I think this isn't, my claim, which is that the PC industry will not be exclusively x86 anymore. Why do I think that might be true?
And also that the PC industry is going to move more and more towards SOCs.
Sure.
And farther away from any sort of modular design. Which, that's something that's been happening for a long time, but Apple's leap to a pure SoC with the new Mac Mini, things that are real, desktop computers, is surprising and is a big jump toward that ultimate sort of outcome.
Yeah, and my evidence is sort of looking at the history. In the last maybe 20 years, as Apple has gone, so has the rest of the personally computing industry, and especially for laptops. So Apple was really the first company to make laptops thin and light. I think especially on the thin angle.
With the Air.
Second one, they were the first to put in really high resolution screens like the Retina, and there's also just a lot of minor things like soldering RAM on the main board directly, removing headphone jacks, that were kind of they led a trend, and those things followed in the next 2 or 3 years to PC laptops as well. So
and I wanted to point out that
they're also the biggest company in computing.
The largest single. I also want to point out that these sorts of changes aren't limited to Apple. If we look at AMD, currently the leader in x86 performance, their most recent Ryzen APUs, at least since Raven Ridge, are true SOCs, incorporating not just computing and GPU and graphics into one die, but also the PCI Express lanes and USB are integrated directly into the chip, as well as the memory controller. Of course, that's been something that AMD's done for a long time. But with these latest Ryzen APUs, the motherboard really doesn't have much of a function. It's just it's a substrate. It's something to slap the CPU and act as a breakout board for the physical connections that you need to your monitor, to your mouse. But we're basically, AMD's headed in that direction as well, and those APUs are going to show up in more and more consumer products. And if you look at the number 4 computer manufacturer by shipments, it's the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Of course, Raspberry Pi Foundation just made the Raspberry Pi 400 an extremely affordable, $70 for the basic kit version, computer built into a keyboard based around the Raspberry Pi 4. but entirely built around a Broadcom ARM SOC. And those computers are flying off shelves because with COVID and students at home, traditional laptops were actually in limited supply. And people started to use whatever they could find. Raspberry Pi Foundation came up with a product to suit that need. But that's a lot. I mean, a lot of people's personal computing experience is not going to be things that have edge connectors, things that are x86. So, I mean, I think that the writing is on the wall for the PC.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this development happened in IoT and smartphones, and it's just basically it's becoming better than the x86 sort of the.
Well, I mean, that was the thing. So for the longest time, there seemed to be this wall between what was going on in the mobile side, in the phone world with ARM SOCs, and what was going on in desktop because there was such a big performance divide. Desktop class processors use so much more power, but also have so much more performance. And what Apple's M1 has really shown us, the first Apple Silicon product, even though it is built for an extremely small, power and thermal budget. It is an ultrabook part with only 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores in a big little configuration, as is done in the ARM world frequently. But if you look at the single core performance of those performance cores, it is within 8% or sometimes even faster than a core on AMD's Ryzen 9 5950X. Which is like nutso. When I read that, I just, my jaw dropped because for the longest time that was the differentiation. And that's done. That's over. I mean, Apple could tomorrow say, oh, we've got one with 8 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. Because we're doing it in a 5 nanometer process. They can probably wedge them in. And that's what's going to be in the new iMac. And what's the industry response to that on the PC side?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a bit dumbfounded myself because, I started putting together this episode before we had real benchmarks, meaning like not Apple.
Yeah, it was still embargoed.
I had predicted that their SoC might be faster at multi-core but slower at single core because so much development over the whole history of x86
single core IPC
making the single core faster because it's only recently that applications really took advantage of multiple cores. So I expected to go down that angle, and I'm just surprised and hoping to look for more benchmarks. There must be applications where x86 is better.
But I mean, if there aren't many. I mean, all of the traditional benchmarks, things that really matter when it comes to even video editing. The Cinebench scores being within 8%, and then Apple M1 leading Ryzen 9 in things like gzip, which is essentially a synthetic benchmark, but it's not an irrelevant benchmark. I mean, compression, decompression, these are things that are happening on the fly all the time when you're in a normal computing environment. So I don't think this is just a case of Apple choosing the benchmarks that reflect most favorably on its products. I mean, across a whole bunch of uses cases, this thing is as fast and sometimes a little bit faster than the hottest things that AMD hasn't really even shipped yet. So it's and this is super crazy because we're looking at what was going on with the 4000 series Ryzen processors and the 5000. You're seeing these fairly historically large increases in IPC and single core performance, thinking, wow, they're walking away. The computer that I'm running this on now is an order of magnitude slower than what AMD is currently selling. And I thought, well, now it's time for an upgrade. But then my whole world, cue to the brain explosion gif. Should we talk about some outcomes, some consequences, Alan, of this huge tectonic shift in the market?
Yes. Yeah, so I think the likely outcome for the PC market is that we'll see competing SOCs from different manufacturers. I think they'll both be using x86 and ARM. And I would expect to see them in 1 to 2 years. I don't think it's going to take very long for this shift to happen, especially when you look at the power consumption improvements that can be made.
Oh yeah, the power consumption
So,
is
which
fantastic.
matters for most people. I think the one group of people that it's not going to matter for in the
Are the
short
people
term,
who watch
or
YouTube
even
shows
medium
like
short.
this? Are the fans of
No,
Linus Tech Tips? I mean, I'm
well,
envisioning a future
I
where
was going to say gamers, right? So
yeah,
gamers, they don't care about power
enthusiasts.
consumption.
Yeah,
Sure, enthusiasts. They just want to be able to plug in the hottest, well,
right.
maybe literally hottest,
Yes,
but the best,
literally
the
warmest.
latest, greatest discrete graphics card. And so I think for 5 years, I could imagine, inertia where the games are still best on x86.
Right.
And, it's also, we started this video game console cycle that's probably going to last 5 years, and that's all based on x86. So it seems like 5 years seems
Yeah,
like
we got
the amount of time.
5 years of time before Linus on Linus Tech Tips is doing. Today we're going to build an Alienware system by going to the Dell website and selecting some drop-down options, and we'll see what shows up at the door instead of.
It does get a lot less fun with SOCs.
It gets so here's what I'd like. I wanted to sort of give you a vision of a future in which, when you go to buy a PC, you go to the website, and then you can select from a huge selection of processing cores, from GPUs, from I/O options, and basically design your own SOC on the site that will be custom lithoed for you and put into a physical package and delivered. And that day, I think, will be amazing. I think that will be an incredible, new sort of computer market. But I don't think that day is going to happen for a long time. And until that day does come, we're just going to suffer all the negative consequences of this, which are that it's going to be impossible to repair. There's going to be no customization. There's going to be no upgradability.
Basically, you're already getting to the consequences. I mean, I think taping out a custom chip for each person is not realistic.
It's not realistic now, but I think that, in the future, if you look at how other technologies have evolved, I don't think that it's impossible that will happen. But I think it is a ways out.
I mean, I could see it being based on binning, where they try to make chips with all the functional units, but if they only pass half the GPU cores, they'll sell it.
Well, I mean, that's what AMD does now.
I
mean,
I think that's reasonable.
That's not new, but
whole new chip, that's just crazy amount of.
No, because you'll have, you can probably do it even without machine learning and AIs to be able to, create the interlinks and be able to do that. I think it's all possible. It's just none of it exists right now. I mean, for now, I think your recommendation was to hoard a whole bunch of, old motherboards and things, which I've already done. So I'm good.
So let's get into you mentioned consequences of this. Can you repeat those?
Well, so the things that we're thinking about, are the ability to customize, which is important to YouTubers who do build videos like us.
Well, there's expandability. I mean,
and expandability, yes, right. End users being able to upgrade and expand.
Sort of losing RAM slots, but once it's on the chip, it's not
being able to extend the life of your computer. So there's a customization angle, and then there's sort of an upgrade angle to be able to extend the life of your computer by adding in upgraded components. And unless you've got a rework station, that's going to be pretty hard. In this new future.
Right to repair is going to be rough. Like, I can already see Louis Strassman get a bit more glum, because when Apple moves more things to their own silicon, it's going to be fewer chips, and they're all going to be proprietary, and there's no way you're going to be able to repair those things. So computers will get to be more disposable.
I mean, people are already.
We've already been there, though. We're already
we're already there in the mobile space. We're already there. I mean, computers are already highly disposable, which is not something that you would ever, if you were sitting here in 1995, you would never think that. But we've gotten to that point. But I mean, the amount that you're disposing also, as things shrink down, the overall from an environmental standpoint, just the size of things becoming smaller. I mean, this is the other thing. Do you see the teardown of the new Mac Mini? The logic board occupies like a third of the enclosure.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't change the enclosure yet, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it especially because they used to have, I think, RAM slots. It was the only Mac maybe with that still. And so there was some additional sort of room
right.
for that. But now it's sort of comical. It's like,
it's a
just
hollow
like a
box.
heatsink on a thing, and that's about it.
There's a little laptop fan sitting on top of the SOC and then some ports, which, I mean, it looks like a Raspberry Pi. It looks like the Raspberry Pi 400. I mean, that's more evidence.
Yeah, with a bigger heatsink, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the direction of things.
Yeah, and then the other consequence is obvious: is binary compatibility. Being able to run old programs will be dead, but software distribution's so easy, so nobody will really care about that, but us maybe, because we run a retro PC computing gaming YouTube channel here.
Right. I mean, we have to keep the things that work running, but we've hoarded a lot, and so I think we're good for a little while. I mean, in the future for preservation issues, given how good the emulation is, even with Apple's like Rosetta emulation is so good, and given how long x86 is around, how well understood it is, I'm not worried about suddenly all of the history of x86 being lost due to this transition. That seems like an extremely unlikely outcome. So I'm not as concerned with that, especially with performance being so high. Like it's no problem to emulate.
Yeah, we're trying to get to on this YouTube channel up to playing a lot of games from the Windows 98 era.
Yes, that's what we want to be doing. We're clawing our way month by month.
For new viewers, much of the content that we post on this channel is playing PC Gamer demo discs. Starting in '95 and going through perhaps to 2001.
And we've made it so far. So far, we've made it all the way to November of 1995. This is our next episode, which I'm excited for, which means we're this close to 96.
So, I mean, one approach to play that is to hoard hardware from that period. But I do think emulation is almost there. So maybe we won't care anymore. We'll just emulate. I mean, it is hard to...
It's funny that you mentioned that, too.
With, leaking capacitors and...
I'm about to record, actually, a separate video introducing Smug and Play's first product offering.
Oh, wow.
That's not yet. That's later this afternoon. I'm recording that. But it's funny that you mentioned how, with leaking capacitors and everything else, sometimes emulation isn't the worst thing if you can get it properly configured. But, so it's a bold new world of personal computing, Alan. And as you said, there are a lot of really great things about it when it comes to performance and power consumption, things that people should be concerned about.
Well, it's a shame because, for a long time, I feel like laptops, they put in a really high-spec chip, but then it's like throttled down by poor cooling.
Yeah, right.
So you didn't really get the performance you were paying for, theoretically. So
right. You really want to have a 15-watt TDP if you can. And it's really about what can you do with 15 watts. And I thought that what AMD was doing with the Red Wire APUs with 15 watts was amazing and unbelievable. And now, it's because Apple has a GPU on there as well that I think is almost as fast as a GeForce 1650 or something like that. That's commendable. I mean, that's an Ultrabook. It's crazy. I'm over here. I'm looking over here. Just to my right is, I haven't recorded this video yet, but I've got an Athlon FX60 socket 939 system, Enforce 4, and a ATI Radeon X1900 XT. And, I can tell you, there's nothing, I can't spot a single component in there that has a 15-watt TDP. I don't even know if the Sound Blaster card does, for that matter. I mean, it's a pretty big one. We've come a long way, but my heart my heart yearns for the era of easy customization and the ability to extend the life of my computer, and the joy of big, inefficient, modular components.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm old.
Well, people love those old games. They're a good era of games. That's the whole point of this YouTube channel.
Right.
So,
yeah. It's to celebrate
so it's worth
that.
it.
So should we lower the PC into its grave?
You said you were gonna have like an image of John Hodgman with a sword through its chest, and I was like, no, we love.
Well,
John
you told
Hodgman.
me that the PC is dead, and you told me you wanted to use John Hodgman as our cover image, and I said, well, is he going to have like a spear through his chest or something?
That's not what I meant.
You wanted him lying in
two
state.
things together.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So you wanted to bring in some Apple nostalgia into
Yeah,
this.
I think
I will say this is probably the only time, because this is a PC gaming podcast, but,
Yes.
or YouTube video
Yes.
thing.
I'm ready to come out of the closet.
But let's indulge ourselves with some 2000s
Yes.
Apple history.
So I just want to say that although this is a PC gaming podcast, specifically a Windows 9X gaming podcast, even though we haven't really gotten very far into the Windows 95 era even so far, I did want to admit to everyone that in 2006, my first job in the industry was actually at Apple, not Microsoft or NVIDIA, and that I was on the Mac OS 10 team. I don't know if that's visible or not. This is my jacket that I got for working. I'm too fat to actually fit in it now, but that I got for working on this bad boy. This is Mac OS 10 Leopard. This is my NFR copy from Apple, and at that time, Apple was going through a major architectural transition from the IBM Motorola PowerPC architecture to x86. And I remember at the time just how much belly aching there was internally at Apple about having to support 32-bit PowerPC and 64-bit PowerPC and 32-bit Intel and 64-bit Intel simultaneously. Absolutely every senior director was up in arms over this. And they basically said, we're never supporting multiple architectures again. And then, basically 1 year later, 2007, of course, they take some, I think they took some, fork of Mac OS 10.4. They port it over to ARM and then make iPhone OS. And then once again put themselves in this position where they're supporting multiple architectures. And of course they moved from ARM v6 to ARM v7, ARM v8, and so on and so forth. And I thought, there's no way Apple is going to allow this state of affairs to remain. Like, Apple's goal is to have one architecture that they support across absolutely everything. And so this didn't surprise me. It kind of surprised me how long it took to happen, because this team that made the Apple M1, they are the sort of the descendants of the PA semi team that Apple picked up in, I believe, 2007 or 2008 to help design the SOCs for mobile. And so, this has kind of been in the works for a really long time. But I just wanted to bring in that little bit of history, because I was there the last time they did this. And, it internally, it hurt a lot. But, externally, Rosetta worked pretty darn well. And as we've seen with this most recent transition, developers are bringing over the big apps, Photoshop, Chrome, very quickly to the new native architecture. So I wanted to give that little bit of nostalgic history. Well, what about you?
Yeah, my history. I'm dating myself a little bit, but I went to college in 2006, and the transition had been announced, I think, early in 2006. But I was running on this really old iBook G4 at the time, and my parents were going to buy me a laptop for college, and I guess I couldn't wait for. I didn't believe that the MacBook Pro would actually come out by the time I would go to college.
Yeah.
I just bought the latest PowerBook G4, the last model, 1.67 gigahertz. And so then I showed up because the MacBook Pro probably came out in like, I think they started shipping them in like late August or something. So kids, when I got to college, all had these new MacBook Pros. And I was really embarrassed with my PowerBook G4. Couldn't turn, more than like 20 frames and anything. But it's weird we're talking about this because I actually really loved that PowerBook G4 because it was so quiet. The fan only ran if you like really were maxing it out, and it had great battery life. It was underpowered, but it used still less power than the new Intel-based MacBook Pros.
I mean,
and
that was the thing
kind
with
of missed that machine a little bit because I spent most of my time, teaching myself CS on that, and I didn't need.
Well,
I didn't need a gazillion gigahertz.
Well, I went to college with a titanium PowerBook G4 at, I believe, 800 megahertz. And that saw me through all my CS courses. I ran, alongside Mac OS X, I actually ran Gentoo Linux, which I, hand configured for PowerPC so that I could do all my sort of Unixy-based things. And a perfectly good laptop, really a really interesting machine in terms of the materials and the design. I love those old things. So
I loved it, but I should say I had to upgrade quickly because I think 10.6 was the last version of macOS that supported that.
No, 10.5. So 10.6. So 10.6 was Snow Leopard, Alan. So we supported it for all of one release after the availability of Intel Macs. It was just 10.5 Leopard supported everything. 32-bit PowerPC, 64-bit PowerPC, 32-bit Intel, 64-bit Intel. Then with Snow Leopard, the next one, 10.6, they dropped all PowerPC, only supported 32-bit and 64-bit Intel, and then I think with Lion they dropped 32-bit Intel. So things moved rapidly away from PowerPC. PowerPC, became obsolete very quickly, and the Apple's Intel products didn't really hit their stride until Core 2. The Core Duo and Core Solo products that they had briefly were still, very performant in native stuff. But the Core 2, I think, was a better argument. That was a big jump. I was recently planning to do a video about going back to a PowerPC system. I have an old Quicksilver G4, and I was going to do a video about what it means to be obsolete. And I was even playing around with porting some new software to PowerPC, Mac OS X. And if you go into the OpenXCom forums, OpenXCom is an open source reimplementation of the classic game that we talk about all the time, XCOM. If you go into their forums and look at like the build section, I have a post there where I have released a DMG of OpenXCom 1.0 ported to macOS 10.5 on PowerPC exclusively. I did not make it a universal binary. To my knowledge, I'm the only person to have built OpenXCom for the PowerPC G4. And it runs pretty well with some caveats. But
okay. I mean, I hope
it took all day to compile.
Doing this.
Yeah, don't do this. It took like a day to compile, and the process of debugging, it was just so horrendously slow that it was painful. Leopard itself has aged very well because we've got index search. The Finder was revamped. It's all, and you have expose, and you have just all sorts of great stuff. Quick look. So it's a wonderful desktop experience. It's just slow as. So, yeah. Anyway, progress happens, and it's not always so bad.
I think it's good, but that was a good nostalgia hour for both of us.
That was a good nostalgia hour. I hope you enjoyed. If you really like this, then that's weird. But please like and subscribe. And check out our other videos. We do build videos with things that are extremely obsolete using modular components, just like every other YouTube computer channel. And we have been playing through all of PC Gamer's mid-90s demo discs. We started in the beginning. We've now made it. Next month is going to be November of 95. There's a MechWarrior 2 demo on there that you should all be looking forward to. But, in the meantime, you can watch us play Need for Speed from the previous month's disc. Because there's a real classic for you. Alan, do you have anything to add before we adjourn?
There's also the Command and Conquer review to look forward to.
Oh, that's right, in the magazine.
It's not on the disc, but it's reviewed. So
yeah, and also you can play that demo, an upcoming Smug and Play product that will be shortly discussed.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, so look forward to that. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.